Gottlieb System 80 called Time Line. This is actually kind of a cool game. We had to finagle with the locks to get it open, but we now have it open. It's got its original battery, which is bad, but luckily it didn't really leak, which is a real shocker. I'm looking at the pins in here and they're not too bad. Might have to do some gentle repinning, but not too much. Overall, everything looks pretty good. Of course, the ground mods were never done, so we'll need to do that and basically get everything running. This is real. This happens a lot here. The cabling, see how it pulls off the bottom of the driver board? That's because when you open the door, these things kind of stretch. They're supposed to be, and these things are supposed to be locking the cables in place, so that doesn't happen. Because we're in the bottom of the System 80, and the one big thing you always want to look for is the dreaded orange filter cap. This is like the 12-volt filter cap that'll eventually get turned into 5 volts for everything. And these are notorious for just being crappy. So I've got a new 10,000 microfarad electrolytic that we're going to put in its place. I'm going to do that before we even proceed any further, before we do anything as far as turning it on. I'm going to put that in first. That's just what I always do. Got a bunch of fuses here. I'll check those. There's under the playfield a bunch of fuses I've already found. They're way in the back. I've already found a couple there that are blown. So it's kind of typical System 80 stuff. When there's no ground mods done, you get a lot of blown fuses and locked on solenoids and stuff like that. So that's what we have to try and address, and do the ground mods and hope that get the game to run consistently and reliably. Look at that new cap. It's a lot shorter, but it's 10,000 microfarad, but it fits right into the original bracket. Anyways, we're done with that. Now we're checking fuses. Here, hold. See? Show the fuses. And then I'm just pulling them out one at a time and then using my meter with continuity just to make sure they're all good. I pull them out just to make sure that the fuse clips don't disintegrate, or the fuse for that matter, because sometimes that happens. It's looking like all these fuses are good. That's a good sign, because generally if one of the bridge rectifiers, which are these things over here, if one of those are bad, that'll usually they'll short and blow out a fuse. For the next thing, we remove the solenoid fuse. See how I have it out of the holder? We got that out for what we're going to do next. For power up, I want to do some ground modifications first. The main thing is right here, these set of wires here. The green is the ground coming from the lower cabinet, and it comes up to this metal bracket for the speaker. So I ran a new wire, a new green wire off that, and then over to the metal frame of the power supply. And then another wire, another green wire off that up to the negative lead of this capacitor on the power supply. That does step one, actually step one and step two of the ground mods. So step one would be tying the main ground frame to the power supply frame. Step two would be tying this power supply capacitor to the main ground. Here's the power supply. Typically you have cracked solder joints on these 0.156-inch Molex connector pins here, here, and here. To get access to them on the back side, you can see you can't because of the heatsink and the transistor mounted on the back. So you have to split the case here, take all these screws out, desolder these 2 points, and then you can spread these two things apart and resolder them and then put it all back together. Flip this thing over and look at the solder joints right here. And I can see concentric circles around them. They're cracked. The solder joints are cracked. That'll cause intermittent power failures if that's not corrected. So you got to take this thing apart, resolder them, and then put it all back together to retest it. It's kind of a hassle. It's not a fun thing on System 80 power supplies, but that's just how they were designed with this metal heatsink plate. The other thing I've done is I've removed the cabling here that goes from this connector on the power supply to the CPU board. Now I want to power the game up without it connecting to 5 volts for this or 5 volts for the driver board. 5.25, you see that? 5.25, so we got good 5 volts. And I can adjust it using this little potentiometer if I need to. Then up here is the score display voltages. I have, oops, gotta set this back up. 65 volts, that's perfect. Then I should have about 40 volts here, 45, that's okay. and then I should have an offset voltage of 5 volts. So I'm good on that. So it looks like the power supply is good. So now what we can do is we can disconnect the driver board connector here, and I can power up the CPU board. But I'm going to do the ground mount on that first too. On this end, the part that goes on the power supply, I'm putting new trifurcon pins in. Do you know why?
Because the quad furcon pins hadn't been invented.
The quad furcon, that's great. No.
We used to use the bifurcon, but they were good for, well, once again, that's a number 2 thing.
Yeah, you don't like the number 2.
No.
So.
Not lately. Number 2 is for shit, that's all.
Yeah. So now we're in, yeah, so we use trifurcon because the quad furcon haven't been invented. Actually, they have invented the quad furcon. They just don't fit in these housings. What do you think of that?
Well, I guess my goal in life of inventing the quad furcon is demolished.
Alright, so we'll redo all these and install. Did the ground mod for the CPU board, which is the negative lead of this electrolytic capacitor goes off to the frame of the power supply. So you can see all the greens come to the frame. And then of course I've done one for the driver board. Even though the driver board isn't connected, you can see I got the connector removed here. This would normally be installed. It's not there because I don't want to bring that into the equation just yet. But I ran the ground for that anyways to this little trace right here, and again that goes up to the power supply frame. So all the ground mods are done. We've turned the game on, and guess what? It is on in attract mode. Well, at least the score displays are on. So now we can maybe try and hook up the driver board next and, you know, take the next step. This is the connector between the CPU board and the driver board. It brings 5 volts and ground to the driver board. We've done a ground modification here over to the power supply frame. But another thing I like to do is, you see this green wire hanging on the end. That's the ground for this connector. This is a double-sided board. They only have ground on one side, and they only have 5 volts on one side. So what I like to do is take a couple wires and add connector pins to them, and then double up the ground. So I can put another ground right here and another 5 volt line right there on those 2 empty holes, and double up my ground and 5 volts on this connector. I think it's a really good idea, just to make things a little more reliable. So here's my 2 new wires added to double up the ground and the plus 5 volts on that connector between the CPU and the driver board. Got the connector between the driver board installed. I've got my ground for my driver board installed. Turn it on there, Gary. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We heard the click. Score displays all come on. This one's a little dim. We'll fix that up in a bit, but they're all on. There's some attract mode lights going on. Everything's looking pretty good at this point.
Look, what a good idea.
A remote battery holder. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a great idea.
Who invented that? What a good idea.
We got one display that's not as strong as the other, so we're going to recharge this display right here because it's a little dim. You see I've got alligator clips hooked up to the 2 outside pins, and then I go down here to the coin lockout coil, and I've got one lead on the power side of the coin lockout coil, and I got the other lead just on ground. And we're going to turn this on for like 3 to 5 seconds, turn the game on, and you'll watch it glow. You'll see the lines glow, and then we turn it off. We only do this just for a very short period of time, or you'll burn out the display. And you never do this to the little display, just the big one. 1, 2, 3. That's probably enough. Does you see it glow? Now after recharging, look how bright it is.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
It's way bright. I mean, it's nicer than
rest.
Yeah, it's nicer than the other ones actually.
Wow.
But you know,
that's all that took.
That's all it took. In 3 seconds, we did it for 3 seconds. Broken drop targets. So we removed this plate here. Well, actually, we took the whole assembly off, and then we removed this plate. And now you're dropping springs. Don't be dropping the springs.
Poink.
Well, you did. You dropped a spring.
I dropped a spring, I know.
You dropped 2 springs. We
No,
got.
they weren't
Oh,
in
there's
there.
one. No, here's
There's one
one.
there.
There's one, and
Yeah,
then the
but
other
that
one
goes
fell.
To this one.
Yeah, no, it goes to the one that just fell off.
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh my God! 2 new red ones in, and we just put the plate on and put it all back, and we're good to go. We have a pop bumper that's intermittent. So these are the pop bumper driver boards. Take them off. If you look, I got on the male header pin right here on the pop bumper driver board. If you look at the joints, I can see there's little cracks around the right here by my thumb. So I'll resolder those, and that should fix the intermittent problems with the pop bumper driver board. Fire up. Okay, let it rip. Okay, so like nothing is alive on the lower playfield until the ball passes that switch. So he's just trying to knock down all the drop targets in a set period of time. Because you'll hear it, like you see there, now it turns off those flippers and turns on these. And now he's playing on the lower playfield, which is kind of neat. I don't know. Oh, and now he shoots it back to the upper playfield, taking that shot. And again, now the upper flippers are on. Here, I'm going to grab the ball. If he doesn't knock all these down in a set period of time, it makes it kind of like a noise. That noise. The flippers go dead, and then the ball drops down, and it goes to the lower playfield. That's kind of near that kind of hockey sound. You know what I mean? That hockey sound. And then he's playing on the lower playfield. It's kind of neat. Cool. Cool kickback.